Hi, my name is Claudia Bosch, and I am in American History 2020 on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 9:30 a.m. The presentation I decided to do today is about the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression was a major event when it comes to the United States economy, and it was something that greatly impacted the lives of many Americans. What caused the Great Depression has always been a big controversy because there are so many different factors to consider. Now, I believe that the Great Depression was caused by many factors, but the most important ones of which include the short-lived economic boom of the 1920s, also the weak American banking system, and the post-war cost of World War I. In the 1920s, this was a time when the government didn't regulate businesses. The economy was growing with new goods and services being provided at a faster rate. Old and new industries began using Ford's assembly lines method to produce more goods more efficiently. Also, new industries such as aviation, chemical, and electric created new products and more jobs. Small businesses also began to disappear, and large corporations became more popular. The 1920s was a time of economic prosperity, but not for everyone. Americans were often going into debt, trying to pursue the American dream. People were buying all these new products with credit, which often left them in debt. Farmers were also suffering. After the war ended, subsidies were taken away. And since farmers had expanded their farms during the war to produce more food for soldiers, they were often left in debt. And when the war was over, it to overpopulation and lower, I'm sorry, led to overproduction and lower prices. The high quality of crops they had and small amounts of income led many farmers and farms to be foreclosed on. Now, federal government did nothing to help farmers either. The stock market crashed on October 29th, 1929. Many people do see the stock market crash as the main event that caused the Great Depression. But really, the stock market crash was just what caused Americans to panic. The real cause of the Great Depression was the weak banking system in America. Now, when the stock market crashed, a lot of wealthy Americans lost a lot of money. Banks were lending out money like crazy because of the lack of regulations that they had. Big businesses and corporations bought stock with borrowed money and when the stock market crashed, they lost a lot of money. It was the weak banking system that had the greatest effect on Americans. Banks were small individual institutions that relied solely on their own resources. Banks' failures started in the 1930s. And when the stock market crashed, it caused Americans to panic. They rushed to their banks to pull out their money out. If the banks didn't have enough money in their reserves, the banks often just closed. Now, banks called in loans and also they sold off their assets to try to stay afloat. This also meant that credit was frozen. Now, with no credit, there was less money in circulation, which led to deflation. Deflation meant that prices dropped, and because of this, businesses began trying to cut cost of production. The biggest way to cut production was to lay off workers. But doing this meant these laid off workers went making were not making money, so they couldn't buy any goods or any products. This led to inventory building up, which led to prices dropping even further. Now, since banks were no longer lending out any money, employers could not borrow money to pay their workers, and many businesses ended up going bankrupt and closing. Now, President Hoover blamed World War I for the Great Depression as well. Germany owed 33 billion in reparations to France and Britain. And Britain and France owed the US 10 billion. Now the only way Germany would be able to pay France and Britain the reparations was by borrowing money from the US banks. And France and Britain used part of these reparations money they got from Germany to pay back the US. When credit dried up, these economies could no longer do this, and their economies began to plummet as well. As France and Britain's economies began to get worse, they also began buying less American products. World trade came to a complete halt. America made this issue of the lack of world trade worse by deciding to raise tariffs to the highest they had ever been. America increased tariffs as a way to try to protect the U.S. industry. Tariff was called the Hawley-Smoot Tariff of 1930. But it actually led to Europe raising its tariffs as well. The lack of American goods being bought, such as cars from other countries, led to less trade, which inevitably led to fewer jobs. Employment was a big The Great Depression was not caused just by the stock market crash, but instead there were other great events and systems that caused this depression. The 1920s was a time of prosperity that led to the Great Depression because of lack of regulation in businesses and the weak banking systems that could not support the economy, and the worldwide cost of World War I. What we can learn from the Great Depression, or what many Americans might have learned from the Great Depression, was not to rely so much on credit, Also, not to get too deep into debt to the point that you don't make enough to pay it off, and to pay it off as you go. Also, not to put all your eggs in one basket. Know how to diversify your funds. And also that government is not always going to save you in the long run. Thank you.